Hello everyone. Today we're diving into a chilling mystery, a murder case that unfolded on the eve of Easter Sunday, 43 years ago. In a small room inside a church, the body of a nun was discovered. After a rigorous investigation, the prime suspect turned out to be the last person anyone would have expected. But under the influence of the church, the suspect walked free, and the investigation hit a dead end. It wasn't until 23 years later that a shocking breakthrough reopened the case. Even more surprising, renowned forensic expert Dr. Henry Lee joined the investigation. So what exactly happened back then? Let's rewind the clock to 1980 and revisit the entire crime scene together. The city of Toledo sits on the shores of Lake Erie in northern Ohio, USA. Thanks to its prime location for water transportation, it became a bustling port city in the Great Lakes region. Toledo is also famously known as the Glass City due to its thriving glass industry. And the story we're about to explore took place right here on April 5th, 1980, the day before Easter Sunday. At a small chapel inside Mercy Hospital in downtown Toledo, the nuns were busy preparing for the evening service and Easter Sunday the next day. At 8:20 a.m., Sister Mary, who was in charge of the liturgical preparations, headed to the sacristy to call Father Gerald Robinson and discuss the hymns for the evening service. The sacristy, located right next to the chapel, was about 215 square feet in size. When she arrived, Sister Mary noticed that both doors leading into the sacristy were locked. This struck her as odd since the doors were open when she left just moments ago. How could they be locked so quickly? Still, she didn't think much of it, pulled out her key and unlocked the door. As soon as she opened it, she saw a figure lying on the floor. Instinctively, Mary reached to turn on the lights, but then she hesitated. In a sacred place like this, surely no one would dare do something sinister, right? Besides, the curtains were still drawn, limiting her visibility in the dim light. At first, she thought it might be a mannequin used for medical training at the hospital, but as she stepped closer, the horrifying scene before her made her scream in terror. Lying on the floor, surrounded by a pool of blood, was Sister Margaret Ann Pahl, the nun in charge of the sacristy. Her body was positioned in a bizarre way. Her clothes were disheveled, and her pants were pulled down to her ankles. The blood-soaked scene sent Sister Mary into a panic. She rushed out of the room, calling for help from others in the chapel. Police arrived quickly, sealed off the area, and began their investigation. The victim, Sister Margaret Ann Pahl, was 71 years old and hailed from Sylvania, Ohio. She came from a family of 8 siblings. Though her family wasn't well off, they were always happy. From a young age, Margaret was bright, eager to learn, and dreamed of becoming a member of the Sisters of Mercy. The Sisters of Mercy, founded in 1831 by Catherine Macaulay, is a Roman Catholic religious organization dedicated to serving the poor, the sick, and the uneducated, with a special focus on women and children. Many of its nuns worked in education, healthcare, and community projects. At the time, it was a highly respected religious order. Margaret's family were devout Catholics. 2 of her cousins had also joined the Sisters of Mercy, so her family fully supported her decision to enter the church. After completing her training, Margaret officially became a nun. She was trained in nursing and earned her certification, later taking on management and leadership roles at various charitable hospitals across Ohio for decades. By the age of 62, due to declining hearing and memory, she was reassigned to the small chapel next to Mercy Hospital in Toledo to manage the sacristy. Her social circle was simple. She was a perfectionist, strict, and deeply devoted to her work. Those who admired her held her in high regard, while those who didn't found her rigid and inflexible. But these traits hardly seemed like reasons for someone to murder her. Through their investigation, police learned that on the day of the murder, Sister Margaret woke up at 5 a.m. as usual. Around 6:50 a.m., after finishing breakfast, she left the dining room to head to the chapel to prepare for Easter Sunday. On her way, she crossed paths with another nun and two drivers who had just finished their night shift. After that, no one saw her again, until an hour and a half later, when her body was found in a pool of blood. The crime scene examination revealed that Sister Margaret was lying on her back on the floor. There were strangulation marks on her neck. Her arms were stretched straight along her sides, with her palms facing down, and her legs were closed and extended. Blood was smeared on her forehead, as if the killer had mockingly performed the last rites in a blasphemous way. Her left cheek, neck, and chest were covered with dozens of stab wounds. A long white cloth partially covered her right arm, with the rest tucked under her body on the right side. A crucifix had been inserted into her private area. There were no signs of a struggle on her body. At first glance, the scene looked like some kind of evil ritual. Furthermore, the doors and windows of the sacristy were intact, with no signs of forced entry. Nothing was stolen from Mercy Hospital or the sacristy. If the killer had been a stranger, breaking into the sacristy would have surely alerted Sister Margaret. Yet there were no signs of resistance on her body. This led police to suspect that the killer was someone she knew. Clearly, the murderer harbored a deep grudge against Sister Margaret, which drove them to commit such a brutal act of vengeance. The autopsy revealed that Sister Margaret had a total of 31 stab wounds on her face, neck, and chest, each one potentially fatal. No traces of semen were found on her body. 9 of the stab wounds near her heart on the left side of her chest formed the shape of an inverted cross. The murder weapon was determined to be a blade about 3 inches long and 0.5 inches wide, with 4 edges and a diamond-shaped cross-section. Based on the fact that the killer pulled Sister Margaret's pants down to her ankles, inserted a crucifix into her private area, stabbed an inverted cross into her chest, and smeared her blood on her forehead, police theorized that the murderer was performing a satanic ritual. The killer had a deep knowledge of religious rituals and symbols. In Christianity, Satan is the embodiment of evil. Satan worshippers typically fall into 2 categories. The first group believes Satan possesses immense power. To gain special abilities, they invert the cross, use dirty water for blessings, use a naked woman's body as an altar, sacrifice children and animals, and finally engage in intercourse with the altar. This group's hallmark is to desecrate and defile sacred, pure things. The second group sees Satan as a symbol of earthly desires. They seek to satisfy their sinful urges through a series of depraved acts, viewing this as a way to follow Satan. So the killer was someone who knew Sister Margaret, held a grudge against her, and was well versed in religious rituals. But who could this person be? With no physical evidence like hair, fingerprints, or the murder weapon found at the scene, the investigation faced significant challenges. However, just as the police were hitting a dead end, an unexpected suspect emerged. At the small chapel of Mercy Hospital, there were 2 priests and over 20 nuns. They handled both the chapel's duties and cared for patients at the hospital. Right after the murder, the police began questioning everyone at the chapel and hospital. Almost everyone pointed to the same name: Father Gerald Robinson, a 42-year-old Toledo native. Raised under the strict guidance of his mother, Father Robinson had decided early on to become a priest. After years of study at a seminary, he achieved his goal at the age of 26. By 31, he had become well known locally and was seen as a role model for other priests, having never committed a single misstep. Could someone like him really be involved in this murder? Through their investigation, a nun who worked as a janitor at the chapel revealed that there was indeed tension between Father Robinson and Sister Margaret. Sister Margaret's old-fashioned personality often led to arguments with Father Robinson when discussing chapel matters. Due to her age, Sister Margaret's hearing and memory had declined, so Father Robinson sometimes had to repeat instructions from higher-ups multiple times. It was known that Father Robinson found this quite frustrating. Moreover, just a day before the murder, the two had a heated argument. Sister Margaret was furious because Father Robinson had decided to shorten the duration of the Mass. She believed that even a priest shouldn't arbitrarily deprive people of their chance to pray and repent before God. She had reprimanded Father Robinson harshly over this. Could this argument have been the final straw that caused their long-simmering conflict to erupt? Could Father Robinson, in a fit of rage, have killed Sister Margaret? However, this theory still lacked concrete evidence. Another priest at the chapel also spoke up. He told investigators bluntly, "I think Father Robinson is the killer." The tension between him and Sister Margaret was severe. After the murder, the hospital's loudspeaker made an emergency announcement, asking everyone to come to the chapel. I rushed over there. At that point, many doctors, nurses, and nuns were already present, but Father Robinson showed up very late. His bedroom isn't far from the sacristy. There's no way he didn't hear anything. In the end, the hospital manager had to personally go get him, and when he finally arrived, he seemed calm, with a blank look in his eyes, as if he wasn't surprised at all. That's not a normal reaction for someone hearing about a murder, so I'm certain Sister Margaret's death is connected to him. A week after the murder, a few people at the chapel told police that around 7:30 a.m. that day, they heard hurried footsteps on the second floor. The sound suggested something serious had happened. Those working on the first floor stopped to listen and confirmed the noise was coming from the second floor where Father Robinson's bedroom was located. Since his room was the only one in that area, the footsteps could only have come from there. A priest rushing around so early in the morning was certainly unusual. A doctor also reported that after hearing the emergency announcement over the loudspeaker, he hurried to the sacristy. Since he had never been to the chapel before, he took a wrong turn. As he was about to head back, he encountered a priest in a black robe. In his rush, he only got a quick glimpse of the priest and vaguely recalled that he was a middle-aged man with brown hair, around 30 to 40 years old. These characteristics matched Father Robinson's appearance. If the priest the doctor saw was indeed Father Robinson, it would mean he had left his room and knew something terrible had happened. Yet he didn't go to the scene immediately, which made his actions even more suspicious. As suspicions about Father Robinson grew, 2 weeks after the murder, police searched his room. In a drawer they found a letter opener, about 8 inches long with 4 edges and a diamond-shaped cross-section. The handle had a circular brass engraving for decoration. The size and shape of the letter opener perfectly matched the forensic description of the murder weapon. Upon inspection, the letter opener was unusually clean, with no traces of anything, not even fingerprints. It had clearly been thoroughly wiped down. Then, on the brass engraving, investigators discovered a small stain. Testing revealed it was blood. However, the sample was too small to determine if it belonged to the victim. Based on these clues, despite public pressure, the police summoned Father Robinson to the station for questioning twice. During the interrogations, Father Robinson deliberately avoided the police's questions. On the surface, he appeared cooperative, even going so far as to break the church's confidentiality rules, risking excommunication by claiming he knew who the killer was because the murderer had confessed to him at the chapel. But when the police pressed for the suspect's name and details, Father Robinson became evasive. Later, he changed his story, admitting he had lied to deflect suspicion and that he actually knew nothing. At the time, the standard procedure in such cases was to use a polygraph test. However, the results were inconclusive, unable to definitively determine if Father Robinson was lying or telling the truth. Although he showed clear signs of distress when answering questions about Sister Margaret's death, it wasn't enough to conclude he was being deceptive. Later, the police learned that Father Robinson had taken sedatives before the polygraph test, which explained the unclear results. Unfortunately, the police discovered this too late. Before the investigation could conclude, the Bishop of Toledo, in collusion with a former deputy police chief, had Father Robinson removed from the station. Father Robinson was quickly transferred by the church to another location. This wasn't uncommon at the time. It was a tactic the church often used to protect its reputation and cover up scandals. Despite the many clues pointing to Father Robinson, the lack of solid evidence meant he couldn't be charged. After Father Robinson was whisked away, the investigation stalled. The case, which had caused a public uproar, gradually became an unsolved mystery, forgotten for 23 years. In 2003, 23 years after the murder, the Toledo Police Department received a letter from a woman. In her letter, she recounted how, as a child, she had been forced by a cult of male members to participate in a horrifying satanic ritual. During the ritual, the cult members dressed as nuns and committed numerous acts of abuse against her. They drew an inverted cross on her body, threw her into a pit of snakes, and placed her next to a sacrificial object to force her to keep silent. When she was 11, the cult implanted a human eyeball into her, convincing her that her every move was being watched. At 14, a priest in the cult introduced her to Father Robinson. After that, she had multiple sexual encounters with Father Robinson in exchange for money. She had never dared to revisit these painful memories until she connected with an organization that supports victims of abuse by priests. It was then that she decided to reveal the secret she had buried for years and accuse those who had harmed her. The events described in the letter had happened long ago, making it difficult for the police to find evidence to verify her claims. However, the negative information about Father Robinson in the letter prompted the police to reopen Sister Margaret's murder case, but after 23 years, the case files from the original investigation were incomplete for various reasons, making the reinvestigation challenging. The police reviewed the remaining documents and focused on the white cloth that had covered the victim's body and the letter opener collected as a potential murder weapon. The letter opener belonged to Father Robinson, and at the time of the murder, he neither denied owning it nor claimed to have lent it to anyone. So if they could prove this letter opener was the murder weapon, it would indirectly confirm Father Robinson as the killer. After thorough examination and countless experiments, investigators found that the blade of the letter opener matched the stab marks on the white cloth and the wounds on Sister Margaret's body. Moreover, among the many bloodstains on the cloth, one matched the pattern of the decorative engraving on the handle, and another matched the tip of the handle. This reopened investigation not only brought a major breakthrough in physical evidence, but also revealed that Father Robinson was far from the saintly figure many believed him to be. Beyond the accusations from the woman who wrote the letter, another woman came forward to accuse Father Robinson. She claimed she had been abused by Father Robinson during a ritual. In an unverified report, Father Robinson was said to have been part of an organization called the Sisters of Mary in Masquerade. Its members were all men from Toledo, but when they gathered at the chapel, they dressed as nuns. Records showed that Father Robinson had been frequently transferred by the church from one parish to another and repeatedly demoted, suggesting that even back then the church had recognized he was problematic. With this evidence, a year after reopening the investigation, the police arrested Father Robinson, now 66 years old, on murder charges. They also searched his home and found a large box in his bedroom containing hundreds of photographs of bodies, own coffins, both old and recent. On his bookshelf was a small book on occultism, published before the murder. The book had numerous marked passages indicating the reader had studied it carefully. Key sections were annotated, and one heavily marked passage detailed how to perform a satanic ritual, including using a woman's body as an altar, committing acts of violation, and ultimately killing her. The news of Father Robinson's arrest for murder sent shockwaves through the public. Opinions were sharply divided. Some supported the police and believed he was the killer, while others insisted that the priest was a kind man who couldn't possibly commit such a heinous act, claiming he must have been framed. Some parishioners even raised $12,000 to help Father Robinson cover his legal fees. Under public pressure, the police exhumed Sister Margaret's body for a second autopsy while seeking assistance from Dr. Henry Lee, a forensic evidence expert. During the second autopsy, investigators discovered a small diamond-shaped wound on the victim's lower jawbone. Upon comparison, the wound perfectly matched the tip of the letter opener, confirming that the letter opener, or an identical tool, was the murder weapon. After joining the investigation, Dr. Henry Lee reviewed all the case materials. Based on numerous details, he reconstructed the crime scene. He concluded that the sacristy was the primary crime scene. There were no vertical blood splatters on the floor, walls, or furniture, indicating the victim had been restrained from behind by strangulation, rendering her unable to resist. She was then laid on the floor and stabbed multiple times. This explained the blood splattered on her body and the pools of blood around her head on the floor. Based on the depth of the wounds, it's likely the killer placed the white cloth over Sister Margaret's left chest and stabbed 9 times, forming an inverted cross. The cloth and her clothing mitigated the depth of these wounds, which all had a cross-like shape. The killer then removed the cloth and continued stabbing 22 more times, inflicting much deeper wounds. By examining the victim's clothing and the tears in the white cloth, investigators ruled out the possibility that the murder weapon was a typical pointed object. The blade had to have a curved edge like a letter opener. Then, using chemical analysis, they examined the bloodstains on the cloth and found one that matched the pattern of the circular decorative engraving on the letter opener's handle. This could have been blood left by the killer when placing the weapon on the cloth. At this point, Father Robinson was almost certainly the killer. On April 24, 2006, 26 years after the murder, the trial for Sister Margaret's murder finally began. Over 30 witnesses testified, including the original investigating officers, the first nun to arrive at the scene, and experts from various fields. This chain of circumstantial evidence, interconnected and complementary, formed a compelling case against Father Robinson. Interestingly, during the trial, Father Robinson's defense team presented a video of his police interrogation to prove he had never confessed after his arrest. However, the prosecution later used this video as evidence that Father Robinson had admitted to the crime. The video was recorded without Father Robinson's knowledge. Initially, he denied any involvement in Sister Margaret's death, but when the investigators left the interrogation room, he muttered under his breath in a low voice, seemingly pleading for something. The prosecution argued he was confessing his sins to Jesus for the crime he had committed. Due to the low volume, only a few words were audible, like "Oh my Jesus" and "the nun." After nearly 20 days of trial and following 6 hours of deliberation, the jury unanimously found Father Robinson guilty of murder and sentenced him to 15 years in prison. Robinson became the second Catholic priest in U.S. history to be convicted of murder, following Hans Schmidt. Robinson disagreed with the verdict and filed multiple appeals in the years that followed, but all were denied. 8 years into his sentence, Robinson died of a heart attack at the age of 76. With his death, the true motive behind the murder became an unsolved mystery. Perhaps, as the prosecutor suggested, Robinson couldn't tolerate Sister Margaret, so he killed her and offered her to Satan. Where does the truth lie? Perhaps only those involved truly know. Sister Margaret's case is not just a personal tragedy, but also a stain on the Church's history, a reminder of the dark side of humanity, no matter how holy the exterior may seem. That's all for today's video. See you in the next one. Goodbye.